Well, welcome to today's Career Pathways panel discussion. It's titled The New Faculty Experience, Insights from Early Career Faculty. This is a professional development event to bridge the graduate school and your career success. If you're not familiar with Career Pathways, I've included the website address in the chat. Career Pathways provides professional development, resources, certifications, and more. I've relied on it quite a bit, and it's been very resourceful for my career. So today's event will last about an hour. We have 3 professors from ODU that will answer about 4 questions regarding their perspectives and experiences transitioning to the tenure track in a new institution. So please feel free to post your questions in the chat, and the panelists will answer questions at the end. I'm Dr. Robin Dunbar, an adjunct assistant professor teaching environmental policy with ODU School of Public Service. I'm excited about hearing advice from today's panel because I earned my PhD this past May. I'm in the process of seeking a tenure track position at universities, including hitting the road next week for my first one to Appalachian State. So welcome to our panelists today. We have Sage Han from the College of Sciences, Alex Cardozzi in the Strome College of Business, and Marianne Chan from the College of Arts and Letters. So welcome. And before we start with the discussion, I'd like the panelists to take about 2 minutes to briefly introduce themselves. And we'll begin with Sage, then Alex, and then Marianne. So welcome, everybody.
Thank you. And thanks again so much for moderating this and for putting this together. I'm Sage Han. I am a tenure track assistant professor in the Department of Psychology. And I began at ODU in this role in July of 2022. So that puts me right about 2.5 years into this gig. And also what that means is that I'm coming right up on the kind of pre-tenure review. So happy to speak to that if that's relevant or of interest to any folks. I am a clinical psychologist by training. That's what my PhD's in. But the lab where I went to grad school was actually housed within molecular genomics. And so a lot of the research that I do centers around some of the more biological mechanisms that underlie mental health disorders, and particularly trauma-related disorders. So post-traumatic stress disorder, substance use disorder, things like that. So that's a little bit about me. Happy to expand on that if folks have questions, but otherwise we'll move along.
Wonderful. Now we have next is Alex.
Yeah, hello everyone. Thank you for organizing and for inviting me. I'm also still, even though I'm in the same, I guess, cohort as Sage in terms of this is like 2.5 years at ODU. I still feel like I'm transitioning in some ways. So I'm excited to learn from both Marianne and Sage as well, and hear your guys' opinions and advice as well. So I'm an assistant professor in the economics department. I study transportation economics, urban economics, maybe more broadly, some sports econ, and then some like econometric methods. That's kind of a lot there. I wear a bunch of different hats in my research, but I've got a lot of interests and I want to research all of them. And we'll see if going down the path I get to narrow down a little bit. I graduated from West Virginia University. Not sure if I'm missing anything else. Yeah,
That's great.
so just thank you so much for having me here. I'm excited to share.
Yeah, absolutely. Marianne?
Hi, everybody. Also, thank you so much for having me. My name is Marianne. I am a professor in the English department focusing on creative writing, and I teach both poetry and creative nonfiction. I graduated with my PhD from the University of Cincinnati, where I got a PhD in English literature and creative writing. I primarily write poetry, but I'm also writing nonfiction right now. And I've published 2 books. My first book is called All Heathens, which was published in 2020, and it's about living in the Filipino diaspora, and also thinks about Magellan and the narrative of the circumnavigation of the world and that early history of colonization in the Philippines. And then I published my second collection of poems this year. It's called Leaving Biddle City, and it's about growing up in Michigan and what it means to leave a place behind. And so, yeah, I'm really excited about the conversation here today because I've only been here for about a year and a half, and so I feel like I'm the babiest of the baby professors here. So I'm really excited to hear everyone's advice.
Oh, well, welcome. Thank you. So this workshop is intended to expose graduate students to the issues faced by new faculty as they make the transition into academic positions. So can each of you please speak about 5 minutes to 2 or 3 major issues you faced as you made the transition? And we'll begin again with Sage.
Okay, sure. So this was such a good question. And upon reflection, for me anyway, this tended to fall into 3 broad categories. The first of which I wasn't quite sure how to title, but in my own mind thought maybe just kind of independence broadly. And so to explain that a little bit more, I was very lucky in that in graduate school and my postdoc research experience, I had fabulous mentors. I had really hands-on mentors who were very involved, provided wonderful feedback and just kind of really provided me with a lot of excellent training and were present along the way. And one of the things that I noticed felt like a welcomed but really difficult shift for me was kind of this transition into independence. Mostly speaking, kind of research-related independence. So, for example, I had all these ideas that I kind of wanted to explore and research ideas that would kind of build off of what I've already done, but noticed feeling a lot of discomfort and uncertainty about like actually exploring them. So like, what does it mean to come up with my own study? Or even if I have this research question I feel good about, to design a study on my own without kind of feedback from mentors or someone that's kind of really hands-on that I think is an expert in this. I want to make sure it's kind of done well and done right. And when you transition to a tenure track role, you're kind of taking on that role as that expert. And so I don't know if you want to call that imposter syndrome, or it probably kind of falls somewhere under that umbrella. But finding the kind of lack of feedback really, really not even, I mean, difficult, certainly, but just like interesting and new for me to navigate. And so in taking that a little further to like kind of what did I do and how did I manage that? The short answer is, I think, to really have a Nike just do it approach, which again was like very uncomfortable for me. And now that I am a couple years, about 2.5 years into this role, and have gotten some studies off the ground and put some things out there that are really kind of truly my own, it's a little bit easier for me to sit here and say that was kind of the right move, that you just kind of have to trust yourself and know that not everything will land. But I kind of believe that academia has its own feedback built in throughout, right? If you're trying to publish a paper, you're going to get reviewer feedback. If you're trying to write a grant, you're certainly either going to get feedback or not, but you'll find out if someone thinks that's a fundable idea. And so really kind of just trusting myself to put out there what I thought would be good science, but also to just kind of trust the process, that there will be kind of some vetting. So I won't be putting bad science out there if it really is. Related to that, and this might show up later on, is I still did seek a lot of feedback in these first years and really relied on kind of more senior mentors in my department who I'm just very, again, continue to be blessed. You hear like horror stories in academia, but I've just had really awesome mentors. And that's been the case here at ODU too. Senior faculty who are just so supportive and really, really helpful. And it's become, even that is like a mental shift from like from getting mentorship and feedback on an idea to more like, let me rope in a colleague and rope in their expertise and see how we can collaborate on a project. And that's still this kind of mental shift I think I'm working with. So that was kind of one point. How am I on time? I'm already at my 5 minutes because that was the first and foremost.
Well, all advice is welcome. So if you have one more, we have time.
Okay. The other one that's definitely shorter is, and just course prep was certainly another one that came to mind. So I, in grad school, had been on research assistantships, had never really taught. I had guest lectured, but I'd never really needed to kind of prep a course. And I really did underestimate the amount of time and effort that takes. And so I think just knowing that out of the gate is potentially very helpful, but something that as a neurotic and as a perfectionist, I found really, really helpful to hear was that this is the thing to not make perfect. Certainly you want to be an effective teacher, you want to engage your students and have good materials, but if you are really seeking tenure, something's going to have to give a little bit. And if that means your slides have a typo here and there, or you're not feeling so 1,000% confident in what you're about to teach, that's okay. And I kind of read up a lot on like how really to be successful with tenure. And that was the most consistent point of advice across all of the materials I found is care about teaching, it matters, and have there be a stop to that. So I literally finally got to the point where I would schedule out course prep time, and whatever
You have frozen, at least for
got
me.
prepped in that time was what, and it ended up being fine, even if it was in. Okay.
No, not now.
Okay. Sorry, that's me. But yeah, so those are really kind of my two main points. And I don't know if I froze in saying really how I ended up managing that was to structure out scheduled time for course prep and to really honor that time. So even if I didn't feel totally done by the time I had made it, I kind of just accepted for what it was and taught it, and it ended up working fine anyway. But really having bounds on course prep so that it doesn't bleed into every single day was very, very helpful for me to finally learn to adopt kind of, a semester or two in.
Oh, great advice. Great advice. Thank you. Alex?
Yeah, I hope we don't overlap too much, but I have a feeling that this might just be a common feeling maybe because I have kind of the same exact sentiments as you. When I first started in my role, it was really hard for me to like come up with research ideas, or if I did have a research idea, I didn't really it was not super clear all the time of how to work through it. And just like Sage was saying, I also had a really great mentor, and I was my cohort in graduate school was very collaborative. So we would always just like hang out or get a burrito and talk and like argue about stuff or chit chat, and that always led to research ideas and or working out kinks in our own projects that we were currently facing. So without that, not that I was lonely in any sense, as I still had colleagues at ODU, it was just different, and adjusting to that environment was a little bit jarring. I wasn't anticipating hitting these like roadblocks or like writing blocks um, in my research. It was always just I kind of had learned how to do it in the environment that I was in, and all of a sudden you dropped me in this new environment, and it took some adjusting. So I say this to say that if this is a similar thing that happens to you, seems like it happened to Sage as well. Like, don't freak out. Like, I was kind of getting a little worried at some point, like, oh my God, I'm never gonna have a good idea again, what am I going to do? I'm on this time crunch, and it's not the case. Just like Sage said, once you get rolling, it'll roll. It's that initial fixed cost or that initial hurdle of once you get over that hump, the ideas will come back and you'll figure out how to have research ideas, how to get back to writing, how to get back to researching. So in terms of like research, that was my main like challenge was like, I'm in this new environment. I don't know what I'm doing anymore. I'm lost. But once I figured out, how to handle that, it was fairly easy. They're not easy, but just it rolled the way it was in graduate school. And then the other main challenge, and again, I think this has to do with time management as well, was I actually explicitly got this advice when I was in graduate school that teaching and prepping will take more time than you anticipate. And even though you can hear me say that or hear the person I heard say that to me, it still takes longer even after adjusting for that. So it's going to take up a lot of time and you have to schedule blocks. Like Tuesday is only teaching or Tuesday is only research. And you have to do that blocking and you have to try, even though it's hard to honor that and to make sure that you're saying, you know, maybe in the morning if you want to if you're really excited about your research and you want to do like an hour of it, but then you have to stop it and you have to get back to teaching stuff or get back to research stuff. So I'll say that the teaching stuff is not going to get you tenure at most places. And teaching has this really fun way of feeling productive, but not actually being productive, insofar that research will go so much further if you are productive in that way. So avoiding the trap of like, oh wow, I'm making all these beautiful assignments and I'm getting all my grading done early and I'm prepping for next semester or whatever. It's a very easy way to just do busy work that's not actually going to get you tenure, or at least has been communicated to me that will not get you tenure. So making sure that you're spending time on research, even if it's better just to spend time thinking than it is to work on a bad research project also. Just making sure you have that time to think, to have that time to go through your stuff. So those were kind of the two things that really stuck out to me when I was reading that question and kind of writing some answers to it.
Oh, great. And I noted that burritos are an important tip too.
Yes. Tacos, burritos, any kind of food like that. Yeah.
Wonderful. Marianne?
I ate a lot of burritos in grad school too. I went to grad school in Las Vegas. I got my MFA there, and there were lots of really good burritos there. So I wanted to talk a little bit. So I have a lot of things that overlap with what Alex and Sage said about setting boundaries, and I wanted to talk about that too. But I first wanted to talk about the experience of being on the academic job market, because that's how you transition from being a graduate student to being a professor. And that I think is something that happened more recently for me, because I've only been here for a year and a half. And so I just wanted to kind of acknowledge and kudos to everyone to Robin and to everyone who is on the academic job market right now, because it's extremely stressful. And I've talked to a lot of people who say it's one of the most stressful experiences that they've ever been through, because not only are you worried about getting a job and that your future is on the line. And for English professors and for people in creative writing, there aren't that many jobs. And so it's really scary and extremely competitive. So you worry about that, but then you also are being evaluated constantly that entire year. And the feeling of being evaluated it's pretty terrible, right? Like, as you have to perform, you have to kind of submit your application materials, and that can be extremely time consuming, but then also you have to go to these interviews and perform, and the interviews are really an opportunity. And I always felt like if an interview didn't go well, that I like squandered an opportunity to get a job, right? And I had a couple interviews that didn't go well. I had an interview, a Zoom interview, where I had my daughter. My daughter was about, I think, 10 months old at that time. And I gave her to my husband to take care of so that I could go to this interview, which was like at 4 p.m. and around 3:50, I sat down and got on the Zoom call. And I remember being so frazzled because my daughter was crying in the other room, that they asked me a question, a really softball question about like an experience where I had a difficult, experience with a student and how I handled it. Very easy question, right? And it took me like 15 seconds to answer it. Like I sat in silence because for some reason, I just wasn't in the right headspace for it. And I remember afterwards feeling so devastated that I squandered the opportunity to get this great job. But it went to an internal candidate anyway, so it didn't even matter. And that can happen sometimes too, right? And so I think what's really helpful is like having a community who can support you during that time, having ways to cope with the stress because it's a lot and it can be really hard. And sometimes people don't get a job their first year. And it's just really helpful to have perspective and have people around you who can say, this isn't everything. And there are also, I mean, it's great to get an academic job, but there's also other opportunities out there. And so that was really helpful to me just to have that community. The second thing I wanted to talk about was the same thing that both Alex and Sage talked about, which is setting boundaries. I think that the hardest thing for me going into my first semester here at ODU was making sure that I wasn't, as you both said, spending all of my time prepping for classes. I tracked how long it would take me to prep for one class. So I was teaching 2 classes that semester, all new preps. It took me 10 to 12 hours to prep for one class. And it's embarrassing to say that, but I was like, everyone would tell me like, don't spend that much time, but it was really hard not to because you felt like you were being held accountable by your students. And also I was teaching graduate courses for the very first time. And I was like, I need to prove to them that I'm worthy of being here. And so I had to really make sure that that wasn't happening in future semesters. And it helps to not have to have new preps, right? To be able to teach classes over and over again. I feel like that makes the prep a lot shorter. But also setting boundaries for advising. So I would sometimes get students coming into my office when it wasn't even my office hours and just talking to me about their novels. And it was always the fiction writers talking about their novels for some reason. Poets never did this, but they would come in and talk to me for an hour and a half. And it just took so much time. And so I'm still working on this, but just getting better at communicating my boundaries to my students and also my colleagues. So that's something that I'm still working on. But yeah, it's great to commiserate about this. This is very therapeutic.
Thank you so much. I have a whole list of questions as we go. So that's fantastic. We'll start with Sage again. And so what support or resources have you used in your early tenure years and how were these helpful?
Another great question. And just to piggyback one thing, since there was such a through line across the panelists with course prep, and Marianne kind of spoke to this, but another thing just to note is it does pay off. And I think knowing that ahead of time is just mentally very helpful of like, even if you're like, I'm spending so much more time than I feel I have or whatever for this course, then if you teach it again, you're spending a tenth of the amount of time you spent the previous semester. So going into it with that knowledge can also maybe be a little helpful. If I really only have to do it this hardcore this once for this course anyway. Thinking about resources that have been most helpful in these first years of this assistant professorship, the very first and foremost, I kind of already alluded to, which is senior mentorship. I mean, I just love mentorship, apparently. I love being a mentor now. That's really why I wanted to go into academia, but I still really value mentorship. And so I had some great colleagues who frankly kind of sought me out and offered that if I needed it or wanted it. But had I not had that, I think it's hopefully helpful advice to encourage you to seek it out on your own, whether that's kind of in your department or if you're in a department where that's really not made available to you, maybe seeking it out elsewhere. So your graduate mentors never really stop being your mentors, just like your parents never really stop being your parents. So if that's been a helpful relationship, hopefully that's one you can kind of continue to pull from. But the other resource that came to mind was time. I would argue that time has been my most valuable resource in these first couple of years. And what I mean by that specifically are some of the factors that tend to often kind of get roped into recruiting new faculty into universities. For example, oftentimes you might be recruited with kind of a reduced teaching load. So as you're going on the job market, it's really important to ask, what is the usual teaching load? What do people in your department teach every semester? How many classes? And there's like a nomenclature for that even, which some of y'all might be familiar with. I wasn't until I went on the job market, but like a 2-2 means that you're teaching 2 classes in fall and 2 classes in spring. And so, one, just knowing what that is out of the gate is very helpful. But then when you get the job offer, negotiating some of that, and usually, or sometimes maybe your department will kind of lead with that and say, we're going to offer you I was on a reduced load of 1-1 when I started, which bought out so much of my time, right? It was so invaluable to me to have the time to really only be doing the course prep for one new class a semester, so that I had the other time to do the things I was really excited about, but really overwhelmed by. And that took a ton of time, like establishing my lab, kind of setting up contracts with vendors, all these things that I couldn't have done without that reduced teaching load. And there are other parts that are built into that, certainly, like sometimes you can negotiate getting some summer salary, so where your university kind of pays for your time in the summer for your first couple of years as a professor, and just using that time to do whatever it is that's going to help you get tenure, right? And that might look different across departments, but working on papers or writing grants, or really just setting up the physical infrastructure of what you need. And then my last point about time is that I'm also finding is the very first couple of years of your assistant professorship, you have the least amount of grad students you'll ever have, and maybe even undergrads in your lab, right? And the amount of, again, the whole reason I went into academia is I wanted to be a mentor, and I have fabulous grad students, and they take up an obscene amount of time, as do undergrads, right? And I also have fabulous undergrads. And so having the first year where I didn't have any grad student, and then the second year where I only had one, again, was just invaluable time that I would encourage you to kind of go in saying, let me set up the foundation so that by year 3 or 4, I might have a handful of grad students and I'm teaching more, that I've kind of set myself up really nicely for tenure and gotten some papers out and grants in and stuff like that.
Wow, thank you. Now I'm feeling like I've been a project as a grad student.
In the best way. It's a very rewarding experience, right? And it is time consuming.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Alex?
Yeah, so I'll say that my biggest the resource I was most appreciative of was my general network, whether that be advisors or other people who were in graduate school with me, or people I had met through conferences. All of those people, I was able to set up just even like a Zoom meeting and just like, hey, do you want to just toss around research ideas for 30 minutes? And if nothing comes of it and we just talk about sports or we talk about something else, even that's good, because it gets me out and it makes us start to think and just spitball ideas. Because like I was saying before, the hardest thing for me was to come up with new things to work on post dissertation. So having communications with other people at other institutions, even at different points in their career, like it was nice. I have one co-author that I work with all the time, and he's in the same point as me in terms of the tenure clock. But I also have met people who are associate professors at other institutions. And I'll just lean on them and say, what do you think about this project? Or can we talk about this? And even if they don't have time, they'll at least exchange an email with me or something like that. And that's always helpful. Another thing about teaching, and like kind of like Marianne was saying, I've spent my 10-hour weeks just focusing on one presentation or something, and it's miserable, but just, you know, it does pay off because the next time you teach it, it is better. But at the same time, if you can find teaching resources online, not to copy them per se, but just as like a guideline, like this is what a syllabus should look like. You know, if you're teaching, like, for example, I was asked to teach a course that wasn't really in my field, but still an econometrics course nonetheless. I really was like, okay, I need some sort of like guidance on what this course should even look like. What topics am I even covering? And I was able to find some other people at different institutions. Some of them are at like Ivy League institutions, which I knew, you know, the course would have to be adjusted for being taught here. I also found community college syllabi. So you know, just being able to find slides and all that sort of stuff saved me a ton of time because it at least gave me a guideline or a place to like rest my own notes on and base that. So whether that even that could be as simple as a textbook for a lot of people, but for me, I tend to work better if I can see a syllabus and see some slides and all sorts of that stuff. Um, so I'm not sure if there was like a resource that ODU provided per se, but a lot of it was, I mean, maybe conference travel money so I could go meet other people who are doing similar work and I could get my ideas out and I could get feedback. I can get feedback on their ideas and we could kind of trade and you know, collaborate. I know I've met at least a few co-authors through or people who I'm, you know, we haven't written the paper yet, but we're talking about this and kind of working together through conferences. So that's also a really helpful resource too. It's easy to sit back in your office and work on your own, but it's much harder to put your ideas out there, get feedback, maybe get them knocked down a little bit, and that's okay. But you also meet people, and I think that's an important resource as well. So just resting on your network and trying to develop that early, so you know you develop that and then it kind of moves forward.
Thank you. Great advice to continue to network. And I like that you're telling everybody to just keep engaged with people and don't work in isolation. I think that's fantastic. So thank you. Marianne?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think sort of the theme of this conversation is like finding communities that can be helpful for you. So one thing that was really great when I came in, there was a new chair that came to that was coming into the English department at the same time as me, and she actually started this mentorship program where all new faculty would be paired with tenured faculty. And actually, I had two mentors, a professional mentor and a social mentor, which was really nice because I was just moving here from a new place or from a different place. And my professional mentor was another poetry professor. Her name is Luisa Igloria, and she and I would like text back and forth. I would ask, she was just my point person for asking questions about the program, asking questions about syllabi. So like I would ask her if we would trade syllabi and we would give each other feedback, which was really nice. But then also just any questions about my annual review, anything that's related to the institution, I would just go to her, and we've become sort of like close friends as a result of that mentorship. And then my social mentor was a professor in the English department, but in a different program in applied linguistics. Her name is Stacy Deffibaugh, and she was awesome. We would get together and she would talk to me about sort of like different things that were happening in the Hampton Roads area. But then she'd also answer my questions about getting tenure and how to manage my time. And so it was really great to have that coming into this position because I knew who my point people were. And so I could just go to them if something came up. I was also lucky because I came in with two other new faculty members, and I was able to kind of like, we have like a group thread and we ask each other questions that we might not feel or that we find maybe embarrassing to ask like a tenured faculty member. And so that's been really helpful too. I also attended a lot of workshops. So the College of Arts and Letters has workshops focused on your annual review or putting together a teaching portfolio or library resources. And I attended a lot of those in my first year, and those were helpful as well.
Oh, fantastic. I'm an adjunct right now. This is my first semester. So I have attended, I bet 30 workshops. So yeah, ODU is really great about providing a lot of resources for us that are just starting out. So that's a great tip. So let's see. So we'll start with Sage again. And your question is, what tips would you offer graduate students to help them manage the transition and be successful in their first years as a faculty member?
This wasn't on my little list of bullet points here, but one pro tip to jump off of what Alex said about using existing resources for teaching, that I think is fabulous advice and could also extend to potentially colleagues in your department who have already taught that class. So I had multiple colleagues just offer like, hey, I've taught psychopathology. Do you want to see my syllabus, or do you want to talk through the different textbooks I've used, which ones I like better? That was so remarkably helpful. But then the other thing I wouldn't have even known as a resource until, again, I think a senior faculty told me, and maybe this is discipline specific, but a lot of the textbooks anyway that I use have so many resources pre-existing, meaning they literally have slide decks for each chapter. Psychopathology is one class that comes to mind. Their, Macmillan Publishing website or whatever for their textbook, you can go in and download slide decks that are right in line with the textbook you're using, as did there exist multiple test item banks. So I actually used so many items from the existing test banks because I just thought they were so good. And I ended up having to create very few of my own. So that was just a remarkable resource and pro tip that stuff is out there. And then the other thought that came to mind really relates to startup. So again, kind of thinking about some of the recruitment methods that are that tend to show up with tenure track jobs is that your department might kind of offer you this startup package to kind of hopefully recruit you to join their department. And so that is often kind of financial and like, what are the monetary means you need to make your research happen, but there are also, physical startup like a lab space or other type of equipment that you might need and that sort of thing. One, use every penny you possibly can. I'm in psychology and everyone's altruistic, and I was so thankful for so many people's advice to like, this is the time to be greedy, ask for everything you could possibly imagine wanting. They'll tell you no if they can't do it, right? And I thought that was really helpful, great advice. But the other thing that I wish I had known earlier on, before I got to the interview phase of things, is once you're past the interview and you get the offer, they're going to ask you for your startup. Like, what do you need for startup? And they might give you bounds or they might not. And so it was essentially something that took me multiple days. Like, I just did not work and do my postdoc job because I essentially had to like figure out what is the study design that I could do that would, set me up for pilot grants or whatever. And it took so much time that if I had kind of going into the job market, just almost like ad hoc, given more thought and time to what is some sort of study that I would need to really launch my work or serve as pilot data for future grants, or what do I really need to make my research successful? And if I had even a rough draft or template of that, it would have made the process then of doing that with a job offer in hand way less stressful, because it's urgent, right? It's like, can you get this to me within the next couple of days? And so there are also hopefully folks in your network who can help with that. I had people send me sample startup proposals. They can take any shape and form. I used an Excel sheet and just itemized what I would think I needed and then wrote up some sort of justification. But but that is something I wish I had kind of thought to do much earlier, which is really sit and be intentional with what do I need to be successful for the first couple of years. And frankly, what does that actually look like? How does that break down into numbers or resources or equipment, et cetera?
Oh, that's so helpful. My first presentation next week is a research presentation. So that's helpful for me to think about in case somebody asks me. So thank you.
Yes. And so amazing to have interviews in hand, by the way, Robin. It is no small feat in the job market. And so that's just, you should feel really good about that. It's awesome.
Thank you. Alex?
Yes, so this is like tips, I guess. I think my main tip, and this has been consistent for my advice for grad students who are in grad school and also for assistant professors, is just to be present, be around. Being seen is valuable. It keeps you in people's minds, but also it's good for you because you absorb things, you learn norms, you understand how research is done. Like if your department has like seminars or brown bag presentations or reading groups or anything, just go to those things and you'll just pick up on stuff. I remember in graduate school, we would have weekly seminars where a professor from different university would come talk about their research. And I remember my professors asking in grad school, asking like awesome questions all the time. And I was like, man, I'll never be able to figure out how to ask those questions. How do they know where to pick apart research? And I realized after a few years, because I was going regularly, that it was always the same question or the same group of questions, just worded differently based on the context. And I learned how to pick up that pattern and be like, oh, they're asking about the same stuff every time. And the concerns are always the same, just slightly different depending on who's presenting. If it's a labor economics paper or a health economics paper, it's the same stuff. It's just different discipline or different field. So just being present will reap so many rewards. It'll also help you be really good at managing your time. Well, maybe at least it'll guide you towards being able to organize and manage your time. And then the last piece of advice that I got, which I think was presented to me in a really bad way, but I think it's really good advice. We had this professional development class in grad school, and the faculty member who was teaching it this one week made everybody in the class say their worst idea. And then at the end, they said, stop working on that idea because it's wasting time. Think of a better idea and work on that idea. It was a little bit like humiliating in the moment to be like, here's my worst idea, and then everyone had to also follow suit. But I actually do this where every like few months I'll just take stock. Here are the things I'm working on. What's the worst one? And maybe I won't stop completely, but I'll put it on the back burner and say, I'm not going to touch this for a month or 2 months until next time I take stock. And if I don't think about it until then, it's not a good idea. It's not good enough for me to be working on, and my time is better spent on other things. Even if those other things are administrative or teaching, that idea has fallen, natural selection has taken its course and it has fallen to the bottom of the barrel there. So again, I think he was presented terribly, but the advice is good, and the way to go through that exercise has been very helpful, and I've saved myself a lot of time and effort, I think, by getting rid of those projects that I don't think are very good ultimately.
Oh, that is really, really great advice. Personally, I've worked 24 years in a nonprofit, and daily I've had the executive director come down to my office, and within a minute, I'm asked to create an idea. So the art of for preparing always and thinking about ideas and creative ideas and keeping a list is really, really great because I can see it applies in whatever career setting that you're in, including academia. So that's awesome. Marianne?
Yeah, I wrote down both of your pieces of advice because I think they're fantastic. And just to kind of build off of what Sage said about negotiation. Well, first of all, I wanted to say that it's a little bit different, because I'm a writer and I think that the negotiation process is different depending on what your discipline is. I think that it is really helpful at the interview stage to be able to say this is a project that I'm working on what in all disciplines, because that's a question that you're often asked. Because I was by the time that I was interviewing, I had my dissertation and it was already under contract. And so then I didn't have a new project ready to kind of present to interviewers. And so I had to kind of develop an idea, and it was just based on things that I'd already been working on. And I sort of saw like sort of the themes that were running through my essays and my poems. And I made that into the project that I'm working on, even though it hadn't really become that yet. And it was actually helpful to do that because now that is the project that I'm working on, but I hadn't really developed that at that point. So I had to do that for the interview process. And I think it's helpful to have that. Um, in terms of negotiation, I think that probably everybody knows this already, but negotiate for a higher base salary first, because that's the salary, that's the amount that will be used for raises and for used for any future raises that you have. So I think that it's really important to, like, if you're offered either startup money or a higher base salary, choose the higher base salary for that reason. And then another tip is that I have is kind of, it's a little bit more woo-woo, but the idea of just kind of understanding yourself and doing things your own way. I think that for me, sometimes I want to kind of conform to what everybody else is or how everybody else is working. So for example, my professional mentor, Luisa Gloria, is also a poet, and she writes every single day. And I think that for me, just as a creative person, that's not the kind of process that I go through when producing work. And one thing that I've sort of realized about myself over the past year and a half being a professor is that actually the fall and spring semesters aren't the times that I'm most creatively productive. And if I put a lot of pressure on myself to be creatively productive during those times, it can be detrimental to my teaching and also to my writing. Like, it just doesn't end up feeling right, and I don't end up producing as the quality of work that I want to be producing. And so for me, it's better to just focus, maybe to kind of, if something comes to me, to work on creative work during the semester, but not put pressure on myself to do that, and to work on writing primarily during the summer months. So just focusing on teaching, focusing on service during the fall and spring semester, and really ramping up the writing during the summer months has been really helpful for me. And so that's something that I'm sort of still kind of working on, because I've only been doing this for a year and a half. But that I think that just sort of like reflecting on what your process is, and thinking about the times of day also that work best for you for teaching and for writing can be really helpful.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Well, we've got about 9 minutes left. Does any of our panelists have anything that you wish that you'd like to share real quick before we turn it over to our audience?
I have something, if I can
Alex?
briefly share. I got this advice when I was on the job market, and I thought it was probably the best advice that I had gotten. And is that when you, and this is kind of what Marianne was talking about in the very beginning, like this is for a graduate student who's on looking at job interviews and getting flyouts and all that sort of stuff. It's important to know that the department is hiring you not to be a graduate student, but to be a faculty member. They don't want a grad student. They want someone who's going to raise the average of the department. And that's what they're looking at you to do. So even though when you come into the you get that job and you come into that setting, you might still feel like a grad student. I know I did for probably like 8, 9 months. But you're not, and it's a binary change or a discrete change in your title from, PhD student or postdoc to faculty member. But, it really is a continuous change, and you need to kind of walk the walk and talk the talk when you get that position. they're not hiring you. You're not like sliding in as like the worst person or the, you know, the worst economist or the worst writer or the worst psychologist in the department. They're hiring you to raise the average, to increase the quality of the department and raise the university standing, you know, in general. And I think keeping that in the back of your mind is really important because they believe in you and you should also believe in yourself, even if you have that like deep-seated imposter syndrome, like I'm sure so many of us, I know I do. Um, so I got that piece of advice and I always try to share it with graduate students that whoever's hiring you is hiring you as a faculty member, as an equal, and as someone who's going to raise the average.
Wow, really, really great advice. Sage?
This will just take 30 seconds to jump off. And it's my last bullet point I had on here, which was fake it till you make it. Just to echo Alex's point, this shows up in the department. In my first lab meeting that I ran, I remember frankly making all of these conditions and I was, I don't really know what I'm doing yet. And things just started to go differently when I frankly might have been feeling that, but was like, all right, just fake it. Just act like you do know what you're talking about. And because you do, you just feel like you don't. And really kind of assuming that leadership role and role as faculty, even if it feels a bit uncomfortable. So yeah, it's a great point. I'm glad you put it out there, Alex.
Wow, that's great. I think I saw a question come up, but I don't see it at the moment. Do you see it, Dr. Youssef?
Yes, Daniel asked the question, if you could go back, what would you do differently during your PhD to prepare for a faculty role?
I know my answer, and it relates to my first point of independence, which was I wish I had carved out more opportunities to try to generate my own ideas way earlier on. So some of this, again, discomfort and also just like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't even know how to come up with ideas. I'm a great workhorse. I'll do whatever you tell me to do. But I wish I had really kind of carved out opportunities for that and said, I really kind of want to start a project from the ground, if that's okay, and kind of rope you in when we can talk about it. But I wish I'd kind of learned that skill earlier than I did personally.
That's really great. Does anybody else have a question? I've got a couple myself while we're waiting to see if anybody else has another one. I'm wondering, number one, when you start out, let's say it's a wonderful day, you've gotten your first position. As far as the research goes, you have an idea, you want to do some research. Do you have to have money in hand to do research, or can you just start? Do you have to have a budget?
I think it's really discipline specific. Like as an economist, most of the data I use for my research is online somewhere. It's not always downloadable. Sometimes I have to like collect it via code or something like this. I know some people run experiments and that's probably costs money. I'm again only talking from the econ point of view. Most of our projects don't cost money. Sometimes data is expensive, in which case you need to apply for a grant or you can ask the department if it's not too much money. So for us, like in the business school, or maybe I should just talk about econ specifically, you can start day one without having money. But I don't know if that's true across different disciplines. So I mean, just from my point of view, I never needed money, or I could always kind of get around having money. Having money is also easier. But for me, no, day one was okay.
Mm-hmm. Marianne, did you feel like you needed money in hand?
As a poet and essayist, I didn't necessarily feel like I needed money. I mean, I was always just like from my PhD program on to into my position here, I was just kind of writing all the way. So it wasn't like a big change in sort of how I did research, because I was just kind of continuing to produce creatively throughout that process. So I didn't necessarily need money, but I am currently working on a project where I'm sort of thinking about the English language and how it was brought to the Philippines. And I'm hoping to go to the Philippines this summer to kind of work a bit more on that and to do more research on that.
Oh, wow. And then I didn't ask you, Sage, because I'm assuming you needed money to set up your lab.
I did need money, and I also had the thought though, and this maybe kills two birds with one stone, that one way I found I could be really, or I could be productive kind of for the sake of tenure my first year, was to keep collaborations that I already had, meaning like data I already had in grad school and postdoc, and keeping collaborations with those mentors. That just helped me be productive, get the lines on my CV, get those publications in as faculty, even if it were from kind of pre-existing relationships. And for tenure, your department, your university is really going to look, are you establishing your own independence? So for me, it became a balancing dance of using what I already had access to enough to really be productive, while also starting to be really intentional about carving out things that were independent of my previous institutions and mentors.
Oh, wonderful. Well, we're almost out of time. I have one final question, which goes back to, I think, Marianne, you mentioned about negotiating your base salary. And I'm wondering if at the time of negotiation, since most of them are 9-month contracts, if you mention could I make extra money if I work during the summer, and do you have opportunities that I could?
That was something that I asked about, is it guaranteed that I would teach in the summer? Here at ODU, it's something that you can request. It's not necessarily guaranteed. And a lot of institutions were the same way. But that was something that I asked about, because yes, that would affect how much you were making per year.
Okay.
Mhm.
So that would be on top in addition to your base?
Yes, and also one thing to ask about is a relocation package if you are moving. I think that's something that universities are often willing to give, especially if they're not giving you a raise in your salary, or if it's a small raise, you could ask for a relocation package.
Oh, nice.
Mhm.
Wonderful.